A lovely day to all of you. I am your English teacher for today's grammar lesson. Yesterday we talked about simple sentence. Today we will talk about complex sentence and how complex sentence can be used to show problem solution relationships. Now, who among you here knows what a complex sentence is? People at the back, do you know what complex sentence is? What about people here in front? Do you know what complex sentence is? No, no one knows what complex sentence is. Complex sentence is complex sentence is made up of a main or independent clause and one or more subordinate or independent clauses whose ideas are related. These ideas are connected by subordinations or transition words. Complex sentences can be used to show problem-solution relationships with the help of transition words. Now, what are these transition words? Now, these transition words are so that, since, because, and in order to. Again, a complex sentence is made up of a main or independent clause and one or more subordinate or dependent clauses whose ideas are related. These ideas are connected by subordinations or transition words. Now we have to remember that a complex sentence also can be used to show problem-solution relationships in given sentences. Here I provided you with examples of complex sentences showing problem-solution relationships. Here are 4 sentences that I provided you. Kindly read the first sentence.
The people were encouraged to plant more trees and other plants in their yards in order that air around would be cleaner.
Now, what do you think is this type of sentence? This type of sentence is a complex sentence. Now, what makes this sentence a complex sentence? Anyone? What about these people in front? What about you, Mr. Puspus? What makes this sentence a complex sentence?
I think it is a complex sentence because it has an independent clause and one subordinate or dependent clause.
Michael said that this sentence is a complex sentence because it has a dependent clause and independent clause, which is correct. Okay, now how do we know that a clause is a dependent clause and how do we know that it is independent? Okay, here in this sentence, the dependent clause is the people were encouraged to plant more trees and other plants in their yards. Now, what makes this clause an independent clause? What makes this independent clause is that it has a subject. Here it is people and a verb which is where. Now, an independent clause is a group of words that is made up of a subject and a predicate. Here, it has a subject and a predicate, thus it is an independent clause. What about this clause? Is this an independent clause or a dependent clause?
Dependent clause.
Correct, it is a dependent clause. Now, how do we know that the clause is a dependent clause? Anyone? What about you, Liza? You don't have any idea? A dependent clause is a dependent clause because it has transition words. In here, it has transition word, which is in order that. Now, even though it has a subject which is air and a verb which is would be, it still is a dependent clause because it has transition word. Okay, a dependent clause has a subject and a predicate. However, it is not an independent clause because it has transition word. Let's proceed to the second sentence. Kindly read. Kindly read, class.
Families were told to use water-based paints, odorless detergents, and scented soap and other mild cleaning agents, so that children would not inhale the offensive odor.
Okay. Now, which part of this, which is the dependent clause and which is an independent clause? You, Liza. What about you, Michael?
Can't distinguish, sir.
Okay, you can't distinguish which one is a dependent clause and independent clause. The independent clause here in this complex sentence is this clause. Families were told to use water-based paints, odorless detergents, and scented soap and other mouth cleaning agents. Okay, the subject here is families, and the verb is we're told. Okay, we're told is the verb here. Now, which clause here is a dependent clause? Anyone? No one knows. Okay, the dependent clause here is this, so that children would not inhale the offensive odor. What makes this clause a dependent clause? Because it has a transition word. So that, okay, even though it has subject and a verb, but it has the transition word or the subordination. That's why it is a dependent clause. Now, which clause do you think is showing a problem? Which clause? Okay. What clause? Okay, that's correct. This clause shows or depicts problems so that children would not inhale the offensive odor. Now, this dependent clause shows problem because it has transition words. Okay? When it has transition words, it shows problem. Now, what about the solution? Which clause shows the solution? In here, it is the first clause here. Families were told to use water-based paints, odorless detergents, and scented soap and other mild cleaning agents. Now, a dependent clause can show solution, while an independent clause, the dependent clause can show problem, while the independent clause shows solution. Okay? Is it understood? All right. Now let's proceed to the third sentence. The entry of vehicles was limited so that fumes exhausted would be lessened. What type of sentence is this?
Still complex sentence.
Very good. Complex sentence. Which one is a dependent and independent clause? Right. The first clause is an independent clause and the second clause is a dependent clause. Okay? Now, which clause shows problem and which clause shows solution? You're right. The second clause shows problem because it has transition words. And the first clause is showing solution. Is it understood? Alright. Now we have the fourth sentence. Can they read?
So that the child could give a Christmas gift to his mother, he saved 50% of his weekly allowance.
What do you think is this sentence? What type of sentence is this?
Complex sentence.
Yes, complex sentence. Now, which clause is a dependent clause and which one is not dependent?
The first one is the dependent clause.
The first one is the dependent clause, correct. And the independent clause is the second clause. Now again, what makes dependent clause, what makes clause a dependent clause is that it has transition word. Here it is so that, and it also shows problem, okay? It shows problem. Now, which clause shows solution?
Is saying 50% GPA allowed.
The clause that shows solution here is the second clause. He saved 50% of his weekly allowance. Now, I will be giving you or providing you with more examples right here so that you'll gain a deeper understanding of a complex sentence and how it shows problem solution relationships. Okay? This is a paragraph. Kindly read the first sentence.
More and more children in the neighborhood were becoming sick of respiratory diseases, so the barangay officials planned out some action.
What do you think is this type of sentence? Is this a complex sentence?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Now, which clause is a dependent clause and which one is an independent clause?
The first clause is the independent clause.
Correct. The first clause is an independent clause because it has a subject which is more and more children and the verb which is were becoming. Okay? Now, which clause shows solution and which clause shows problem? Which clause?
The next one.
Okay. The next one, which is the dependent clause. Now, we have to remember that a dependent clause always shows problem, while the independent clause always shows solution. In here, the first clause is an independent clause and it shows solution, and the second clause is a dependent clause and it shows problem. Next sentence, please read the second sentence.
The entry of vehicles was limited, so the fumes exhausted would be lessened.
Is this still a complex sentence?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Now, which clause is a dependent clause and which one is an independent clause?
The first one is the independent clause.
Correct. The first one is an independent clause. Which one is a dependent clause?
So that fumes exhausted would be lessened.
Yes, so that fumes exhausted would be lessened. That is a dependent clause. Problem and which clause shows solution? Right. The first clause shows problem and the second clause shows solution. The first clause shows problem because it has transition word at the beginning of the clause or sentence. And the second clause is an independent clause because it has subject and it has the verb or advised and it doesn't have transition word. And again, this is also a complex sentence because it has an independent clause and a dependent clause. Kindly read the sentence.
Families too were told to use water-based paints, odorless detergents, unscented soap, and other mild cleaning agents so that children would not inhale the offensive odor.
Now, which clause is an independent clause and which clause is a dependent clause?
The first clause is the independent.
Alright, the first clause is an independent clause. It has a subject which is families and then verb, were told, so it is an independent clause. And the second clause is a dependent clause. And the second clause is a dependent clause because it shows transition words at the beginning of its clause, and the first clause is an independent clause because it doesn't show transition words and it can stand alone because it has subject which is families and verb which is were told. The last sentence. Kindly read the last sentence.
The people were encouraged to plant more trees and other plants in their yards in order that air around would be cleaner.
Now, which clause here is an independent clause and which clause is a dependent clause?
The people were encouraged to plant more trees and other plants in their yards.
Very good. The people were encouraged to plant more trees and other plants in their yards is an independent clause. And what about the dependent clause?
In order that air around would be cleaner.
Very good. In order that air around would be cleaner is a dependent clause because it starts with the transition word in order that. The first clause is an independent clause because it has subject, the people, and the verb were encouraged. It can stand alone because it has subject and a verb. Now, is everything clear to you?
Yes, sir.
From the definition of the complex sentence to showing how a complex sentence can show problem solution relationships. Is everything clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Now, to sum up, a complex sentence is made up of a main or independent clause and one or more subordinate or dependent clauses. Now, the complex sentences or complex sentences can be used to show problem solution relationships with the help of transition words such as so that, in order to, before, because, as if, so or so that, etc. I hope everything is clear. I hope you have understood everything that I have discussed in front. Thank you so much for listening, guys. This is Ruchi Sikatipay, an English teacher for today.